Okay, I'm finally back from my longer than planned absence. Right as I arrived back home, I got very, very sick, so I would have been back a few days ago, but I was instead bedridden and couldn't barely talk or function. So, with that in mind, if I sound sick right now, or if my voice sounds strange in any way, I apologize for that. That's why. But it's the tail end, I'm mostly fine now. The topic I want to cover is E3, but not in the same way as a lot of other channels. E3 2019 is fast approaching, a few weeks away at this point, and a lot of excitement is starting to ramp up. It is, after all, the convention where we typically see a bunch of new products and games, but to me, it has become less of a showcase and more of an outright deception. For a little bit of background, I attended E3 2018 with a few other upper echelon members. It was quite fun, honestly. We were in attendance under a business pass, which allowed us early entry onto the floor during certain hours, a special lounge with catered meals and rest areas, as well as some other perks that were kinda cool. The business pass is not, however, how most attendees will experience the convention. Alongside that, there is media, industry, or exhibit, and then regular gamer passes, with media and industry also having special access at certain times, and regular gamer passes being restricted to a smaller set of hours. The gamer passes were also, up till a couple of years ago, not something that existed, meaning that E3 was either insanely expensive, like $1,000 a ticket level expensive, or invite only with strict criteria for media, YouTubers, streamers, or bloggers to gain entry. To be quite honest, I had a lot of fun. The biggest reason was because I got to hang out with a large group of my friends who helped form Upper Echelon in the original days. But a few other reasons had to do with a Ubisoft Division 2 party and screening that we went to, a showcase for Cyberpunk 2077, and some other things as well. At the time, I came away thinking how cool it was, but as I reflected back over the following months, I realized that the convention has a lot of flaws, and in essence, it is a jet-fueled engine which powers the industrial hype machine, and a great deal of companies manipulate that industrial hype machine in a negative way, day after day, year after year. To lay out my premise, I will need a lot of different examples, and what better place to start than the Xbox One? In 2013, Microsoft at E3 advertised their new plans for the Xbox One fresh off the heels of the 360. This was a big deal for them. The conversation quickly shaped around cloud computing and processing power. The basic idea was that the Xbox One would utilize the power of the cloud to greatly increase its processing power, allow for superior graphics, and, most importantly, step away from the need for iterative hardware by allowing improvements to cloud processing and utilization to continuously strengthen the game performance on your local device regardless of that device's relative specs. There was also a specific emphasis on Crackdown 3 as an example. The proposed Crackdown 3 version would have a vast, sprawling metropolis with totally destructible environments as a result of this revolutionary cloud computing technology, and at the time these lofty promises sounded exciting, modern, and appealing. Well, none of it was true. There were some small tidbits that could be defended as partially accurate, but in large part this was all just deceitful buzzwords and false promises. Years later, in 2018, Crackdown 3 was still nowhere to be seen, and speculation was beginning to ramp up that this fabled cloud computing technology was too good to be true. Flash forward again to 2019, and Crackdown 3 has finally launched, but it is a pale shadow of what was promised. The massive, sprawling, fully destructible world, proposed as a possibility because of the cloud computing technology, did not and does not exist. And the game has even been criticized by Polygon, the site that praised Anthem's combat, not realizing that all of the damage calculations at the time were just random numbers on screen with no tie to functionality. For Polygon to criticize something, it has to be really fucking bad. Alongside all this, in 2017, Microsoft released the Xbox One X, their new console iteration, with more powerful hardware than any other console on the market to date. But if we harken back, one of the main and most important marketing points for the Xbox One was that the fidelity of game graphics and performance would evolve through the cloud, and the need for iterative hardware improvements themselves would be reduced. Obviously, this was a false promise, since very soon after, a higher-priced, complete hardware upgrade iteration was launched, and even then, the game promised for the previous generation came out as a pale shadow of what was advertised, based on their cloud computing buzzword drivel. That's just one example, I guess two if you count Crackdown 3 and the Xbox One as separate items, but there is a long list yet to go. Up next is a game I have referenced time and time again when it comes to false advertising, so with that in mind I'll keep it rather brief. The original Division game was shown at E3 2013 like a bolt from the heavens. It looked too good to be true, it sounded too good to be true, and it was too good to be true. The cinematic reveal material was based on a complete fabrication that did not and would never exist. When the game finally launched, it was a drastically different product that rapidly bled through its player base, and though I will say I enjoyed a great deal of the conceptual choices and the gameplay loop during certain patches, when it comes to E3 deception, the original Division game is guilty and then some. In the same exact vein as The Division, let's recall No Man's Sky. Now, I will admit that No Man's Sky has put forth update after update after update, time and time again, to now position itself as a quality title, and for that they must be commended in large part. But if we harken back to the root of its release day struggles, we eventually reach E3 2014. Practically none of the elements advertised at E3 made it into the launch day version. There were wildlife interactions? No. Space factions and battles? Again, no. Not to mention the product at launch failed to even contain certain core features like multiplayer, and crashed 6 ways to Sunday while you progress towards the center of the galaxy where nothing happened. No Man's Sky is a perfect example of false promises that might never have even been based in reality, and E3 gave it a platform to reach millions of gamers and sell those promises as if they were true. But let's keep going even further. I think one more example of this is probably a good idea. Aliens Colonial Marines, a game renowned for over-advertising and under-delivering. Also a game produced under the yoke of Randy Pitchford that ended up having its own set of scandals independent from false trailer promises. But regardless, a huge chunk of the player base quickly found that the launch day version of Aliens Colonial Marines was vastly inferior to the advertised version displayed at E3 2011. The list goes on and on. Watch Dogs from Ubisoft, Mass Effect Andromeda from EA, Xenoblade Chronicles X, Rainbow Six Siege, on and on we go. You get the point. And to be crystal clear, a lot of these games ended up in a good place after months, even years of iterative patching, but some didn't, and all of them fell prey to the false promise bullshit that is E3. To switch gears here for the next example, I want to now talk about Scalebound. Scalebound from Microsoft and announced at E3 2016 looked pretty cool. Dynamic third-person action gameplay, large monsters battling it out, but what looked to be a promising game would never and will never see the light of day. Scalebound was cancelled, but not before being revealed to the world and kicking off the rolling ball of hype at E3. Imagine paying the obscene amount of money to attend this convention before the introduction of gamer passes, or working your way up through the ranks in order to gain media access, visiting, seeing Scalebound, thinking it was the best looking game that year, and then it just gets cancelled. And yet again, this is the first in a long list of similar instances. Star Wars 1313, gone. Pirates of the Caribbean, Armada of the Damned, disappeared. The Gateway 3, Jurassic Park Survival, more and more games cancelled after doctored trailers and hype. It is by no means uncommon. Now for yet another angle. E3 is a convention put together by the ESA. The ESA, or Entertainment Software Association, is a lobbying group formally introduced as the IDSA during the hearings that erupted when the blood and gore depicted in Mortal Kombat came under fire and the topic landed in front of the United States Congress. The IDSA wants to self-regulate through the ESRB, and now, many years later, having been reformed into the ESA, it is the organization attempting to claim that loot boxes are not gambling, and the ESA are not the good guys. To illustrate this further, until 2017, the chairman of the ESA board was Strauss Zelnick, the CEO of Take-Two Interactive, a man notably expressing that he believes Grand Theft Auto V Online is under-monetizing on a per-user basis. And post-2017, his position has shifted over to Robert Altman, the CEO of ZeniMax Media, ZeniMax being the large controlling interest behind Bethesda and the ones truly responsible for a number of the problems and scandals with Fallout 76, most notably the ones revolving around data protection. Furthermore, there are around 42 companies that pay dues to the ESA, and among those companies are the likes of EA, Activision Blizzard, Epic Games, Tencent, Bethesda Softworks, Take-Two Interactive, and a whole slew of others. Some good, some bad, but overall, a cross-section of companies that have been sliding recently when it comes to consumer rights and consumer consideration. According to 2016 annual reports, E3 as a trade show constitutes 48% of the ESA's budget, and when member companies were asked about their sentiments regarding the ESA and the E3 convention specifically, the general sentiment was that there was a lack of strong support when it matters. Keep in mind, those are the companies on a devolving spiral of predatory practices, so strong support when it matters, in reference to E3, means a joint effort to help them prey on their consumer base with impunity through the disingenuous industrial hype generated by the untrustworthy convention. The ESA has also recently been in relative disarray, with this article from Variety going into detail on the subject, so for anyone who wants to read further, I will link it down below in the description. Yet again, let's switch gears here. We've discussed graphical downgrades, false advertising, the importance of the show to corporations and publishers that have no interest in consumer health, and we've also talked about hardware a tiny bit, but let's expand on that right now. At E3 2005, Sony discussed the PlayStation 3. While advertising this new console, they highlighted a veritable laundry list of games and features, most of which turned out to be entirely false. Flash forward to E3 2016, and Microsoft goes in depth on the Xbox One S with the claim that it is 40% smaller than the regular Xbox One, a claim and a visual that is anything but truthful and far, far from accurate. Now for one final point, and I left this one for last because it is fresh in the minds of many gamers out there. Anthem. Anthem is one of the most insulting lies I have ever seen in my time as a gamer. It was blatantly obvious as soon as that trailer played that the game would not be what was shown. It looked great, it sounded great, everything was worthy of the hype conceptually, but it could not have been more obvious that it was a sham. At that time, I was still very in tune with a lot of community members from the original Division game, and I remember in the days and weeks following that trailer, some of the more delusional fanboy ones started to make a slew of Twitter pages for the game, saying things like, "We broke the internet," when they got a couple hundred retweets. And all in all, the hype for this fabrication of a concept was sickening. Well, a couple years later, we now know through the reporting of Jason Schreier that the Anthem trailer was a complete and total lie, created to impress an executive and shown to the public before the actual development team themselves at BioWare knew what was going on. The game is the most recent and likely the best example of why E3 has become a platform of lies, a convention of deceit, and a giant microphone for empty, false promises. And yet, somehow, gamers wake up and get excited over it. E3 2019 is right around the corner, and some of the material shown will likely be wonderful and accurate. If you were to draw a graph of truth versus lies, it would probably skew towards truth, but the number of times that grand promises have been made and then just left behind, the number of different ways these advertisements have failed to deliver so often in the past and will again in the future, that number is too high to ignore. The new version of E3 with segmented entry for different passes has led to overcrowding. Regular Game Pass holders will face lines so long they can maybe see one thing per day. Even with the more affordable passes, it's still hundreds of dollars to attend for a compressed segment. And during that segment, you may wait in line for 4+ hours just to play a game or see it that gets drastically downgraded or worse yet, canceled outright. E3 is a big insider circle jerk of worthlessness. I went once. It was fun, but I quickly realized that I'd only really done two things of importance. The first was a big event surrounding the Division 2, which I already knew a lot about and was absolutely going to play. I had a lot of confidence in it. And the second was see 1 hour of live gameplay for Cyberpunk 2077, a game I had heavily researched and had every single intention of continuing to follow. I played a couple other games here and there, some of which still aren't out and won't be out until well after 2020, like Skull and Bones for instance, but overall I had done a couple of events that I was passionate about and mostly avoided the rolling snowball of industrial hype. The vast majority of E3 content can be viewed through a live broadcast on Twitch. The few events that can't be and take place behind closed doors are exceptionally difficult to get into, and largely speaking, to get into them, you have to kiss a monumental amount of ass because these major publishers don't want to give someone insider access who is not profit safe and corporate friendly. It happens, there are certainly exceptions to this, don't get me wrong, they do exist, but on average, E3 is a tool for publishers to generate hype and spike their pre-orders, which on a fundamental level isn't necessarily always bad, but the way they do it, with a rampant disregard for honesty, that is fundamentally bad. To wrap it up here, E3 is a convention riddled with false promises, downgrades, and outright lies. There are good items too, plenty of them, but it's not an event you can walk into or watch from afar and have unwavering confidence. It's fun to get wrapped up in the hype and to try to silence the critics, I get it, it is, but truth be told, it's all fun and games until you get anthemed. If you want to support the channel, check out the links down below. Like I said in the beginning, I was on a trip, then got very sick, but I'm back now and pretty regular content should be resuming. And also, I know my voice sounded horrendous during this video, but it's probably going to sound that way for a couple more days, and I didn't want to wait to resume the content, so it is what it is. That's it though. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.